Welcome to Keys to the Future, the podcast where we explore the stories, insights, and ideas that inspire the next generation of STEM professionals. I'm your host, Gabby Coe. Today, we're unpacking a big topic: what young professionals expect when entering the workforce, from mentorship and flexibility to growth and purpose. This generation is reshaping what it means to start a career. Joining me today are Meg Lang, a licensed electrical engineer at Northrop Grumman, with over a decade of experience in power systems and control engineering. An award-winning innovator and patent holder, she supports resupply missions to the International Space Station. She is passionate about shaping the future of space exploration and is dedicated to inspiring the next generation of STEM leaders, expanding what's possible through diversity and innovation. Dr. Daphne Chery is a technology and innovation leader, turning emerging technology into real-world impact. She's the Director of Innovation and Automation at Leidos, and she is also passionate about STEM education and mentorship, especially for women and underrepresented communities, and is dedicated to helping the next generation see themselves as builders and leaders shaping the future of technology. Ladies, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
And thanks for having us.
Awesome. So I'm going to kind of take us back a little bit, think back to your first internship or job. What was something that you expected before starting that turned out completely different than once you start to work?
Okay. So my very first job was actually in high school, working as a tutor, a math, chemistry, science tutor. And I think, I expected to make money as a student, right? As a 16-year-old, now have a permanent, can actually work. But I expected that if I knew the material really well and I worked really hard, that it would be enough. What I quickly learned is that how you communicate matters just as much as what you know. Every student learned differently, and success really depended on my ability to adapt to each student, explaining the concepts clearly and building trust. That lesson really became full circle later when I became a senior scientist. So this was after I completed my doctorate at Drexel. I went on to be a senior scientist at the University of Pennsylvania. And I expect that job to really just be mostly about technical expertise and independent work. Instead, what I learned that collaboration was really number one, right? And storytelling and knowing how to position your work for different audiences, because it's not always going to be a very technical audience, but those were really just as critical as the science itself. And the biggest surprise was realizing that impact doesn't really come from brilliance alone, but it really comes from the connection that you have with folks.
For my first job, I was a lady sales associate at a now defunct department store. And it was changing in a lot of ways. I learned a lot of lessons about how you present yourself and what you say matters to a lot of people. It changes, especially when you work customer service, it changes the whole relationship in there. And learning to talk to people, I think, is an underrated skill, especially for young STEM professionals. And I think working something like customer service, I guess I spent a lot of time thinking about, oh, I'll probably just clean dressing rooms and reshelve clothing and that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of questions about confidence. There are a lot of women who come into a department store looking to find their own little bit of confidence, and how you interact with those customers really matter. And as I've gone through my career, the more I've thought about a lot of it, a lot of those skills have gone into things like I currently now am a manager in the power engineering department at Northrop Grumman. And I deal a lot with, hiring and inspiring and coaching, and sometimes redirecting young engineers along their paths. And I think learning those customer service lessons on learning how to talk to people to invoke a positive reaction out of that interaction is something that has kind of really guided me through my career. I think sometimes a lot of engineering, we miss those soft skills like the communication, kind of to Daphne's point about who you talk to and how you say it matter.
I was gonna say, and that part shows up every single role I've ever had. It's like storytelling is so important now. So
I agree.
Absolutely. I think communication Yeah, communication is key, right? We engineers, I say we, I consider myself an introvert, right? And we tend to like stay to ourselves and let's say I'm coding or something, right? If I don't explain to people what my code is supposed to be doing, right? That's a communication skill that you need to have to explain to people what it is that you're working on. You also need to have that communication skill to explain to your manager where you see yourself down the road, right? So that they can help you, achieve your goals as well. So I think communication, you both hit it right on because it's so important. And that's a skill that we may be shy to get in the very beginning in our careers, but I think it's so instrumental to gain it as early as possible in your career. So I am also curious, what were your top priorities or expectations when looking for your first job? Maybe salary. You did mention you wanted to make some money, which is, that's why we work, right? We want to make some money. But did it go beyond that? Maybe you wanted to have mentors in that line of work or more flexibility or something else. And anything pops into your mind right away?
So I was saying, yes, salary, yes, for sure. But beyond that, deeper than that, I've always been a nerd. So it was really about growth, wanting to learn, wanting to be in challenged and the environments that really stretch me intellectually. It's still the same thing now too. I was always looking for credibility roles that would really build like a very strong foundation and open doors for later. Thinking about the next step, what competencies do I need to get? What skills do I need to really like hone in on? Right. So in reality, those were expectations were probably partially met, but not always in the way that I imagined that they would be met. I learned about mentorship, sponsorship, and development. Really, it doesn't always come all packaged neatly. Sometimes you have to actively seek mentors. You have to actively ask for feedback. You got to create learning opportunities for yourself and upskilling opportunities, etc. So the experience taught me that career growth is really less about finding the perfect first job. I honestly don't even really think a perfect job exists, but it's more about how intentional you are once you're in the role.
That's so interesting. I had a very different experience. My expectations were going along the lines of what you just talked about, where I was really wanting to like have a structured like career build and, you know, find careers that build steps. But I am the queen of Forrest Gumping my way through my career in a lot of this. So I studied biological systems and agriculture engineering at Oklahoma State University and went on and was starting a master's program in bio nano electronics. And my research professor, um, my research professor wanted to go on and he had a dream. His dream was incredibly inspiring. And at the time, I think it would be remiss to, especially in the millennial generation, to talk about this area of time without realizing that when a lot of us were graduating college, we were in a recession, a pretty bad recession, and job hunting was really difficult at that time. And so a lot of us, the goal was to get a job. My research professor, I got lucky because he was so inspiring and so passionate about the things he wanted to do that I ended up leaving grad school to follow him to my first job, more to focus on that innovation. And I really wanted to go with him to change the way people thought about agriculture and change the way people thought about electronics and technology and the development and processing of agriculture. So a lot less structured. And then as I've gone through my career, I've learned a lot of things I've loved. I've learned a lot of things I hated. And, every things kind of happen through the process. And I think one of the things that makes me so good at my job today is the diversity of the experience I've had coming from a lot of different backgrounds. The agriculture industry is very different than the aerospace and the private sector space industry. And I did a small stint in as a military contractor, and every one of those things, although they were not planned, I learned so much about myself in the process that now when I deal with things like, how much power does it take to run run a greenhouse on the International Space Station. I have a lot of really unique experiences going back to my days in the agriculture industry to think through some of those problems. And I think because of my diversity in the background and my way of maybe not less structured method of getting to where I am, I think that diversity has really benefited my team. And I think it's made us all a little stronger.
I definitely agree with that. I don't know if it sounded like my career was structured because it wasn't. But I
I
think
don't think
with
anybody's is.
I think with every next role, I wanted to understand what competencies to get in my current role, so make the jump or make the pivot. But actually, Meg, it's really great to hear your background because we have similar backgrounds. My PhD is in biomedical engineering, so I spent a lot of time in the biological space applying engineering into that field. And I'm doing nothing really near that right now. I'm in AI automation, innovation space. Well, it's always innovation, but more towards, SaaS platforms, et cetera. And I agree, the diversity of your background really is what shapes me to be the leader that I am today.
Absolutely. I think we need that diversity in roles, right? And also skills, because that's what helps us evolve into the next technology space, into the next way of how we're going to do our jobs, right? AI is a big component right now that we're talking about, and people are on the one spectrum afraid because, they're afraid of maybe losing their jobs. And then the other spectrum, we have leaders that want to go and, keep moving forward. So, I mean, I think there's all of that diversity and education about the topic or the technology helps us understand how we can move forward in a particular way to diversify our own experiences so that we can again, be leaders or contribute in a better way. So, yeah, it sounds like there's a mix of optimism and adjustment in that first transition and throughout any of the transitions, right? But let's talk about what really makes a workplace feel supported for young people or young professionals. So, what kind of culture do you think makes you feel motivated to do your best work?
Because I've had a very non-traditional, non-traditional process to through my career and non-traditional navigation of my career. I have had the blessing and opportunity to work with a lot of different companies that have a lot of different cultures and a lot of different values. So when I worked in the agriculture industry, there's a lot of tradition. Tradition is a very important aspect that goes into that mentality when you, especially when you're on that like, hey guys, maybe we should try this new thing that could help us tremendously. Sometimes like there's a definitely a gap of bridging tradition, like bridging breach of tradition and encouragement to kind of rethink the way you do things or rethink the way that generations of your family have done things. And I think that's, especially as you go into across all forms of industry, those are kind of values that I think a lot of people are trying to do and where you find that fine balance of like respecting culture, like company culture, family culture, generational culture, but also finding the room for improvement and breaking those traditions when they're needed. And that company was a very small company. The way we did the company culture was very different. I am proud to say I am to this day still the first and only woman engineer in the entire history of that company. And it was a very, very small company, about 50 people, and it was very male dominated. And the way that the interactions we had in that kind of office are very different. At the same time, because it was more along the lines of a tech startup type culture, the way we practiced engineering was really different, where everybody had there was lots of unstructured freedom to pursue things that you thought we could really like benefit the company or really benefit our customers, but you had to go find the idea and you had to go research the idea. And we didn't have all the resources that some of these larger companies have. So at the end of the day, there was moments where I was an electrical engineering department of one, where I wrote the code and I designed the boards and I ran the pick and place machine and I potted the harnessing and I ran all the tests, and when it broke in the field from my customer who was testing it, I was on the plane to go fix it in the field. And I think it was a really, really great experience as a young engineer. But there were lessons I've learned in the process about how important culture is and where you work. And as I moved into Orbital ATK and now Northrop Grumman, one of the things I've really, really grown to value about the larger companies is a sense of structure and the sense of diverse value of diversity. And I think when we work in some of these bigger companies, you have a lot more room to value the experiences everybody has had in the past and have a more structured method of like everybody putting your superpowers together to go achieve one goal. Whereas when you're in the smaller companies, a lot of times everybody's working together just to keep the company alive at one point or another. So the way you value work-life balance. I hate the phrase work-life balance. I very much prefer the phrase work-life harmony because
Yeah.
I will tell you there are a lot of times where work is definitely, especially when you work with human life and space exploration. The International Space Station runs about 5, 6 hours ahead of Eastern time where I am in Washington, D.C. So there are a lot of times where work sometimes needs to be a little bit more heavy in the balance than life. But there are sometimes when we have personal and family obligations where life needs to maybe take a little bit more of a, a weight than work. I think finding those cultures that kind of balance out how that works for you is something really worth entertaining, especially as a young engineer who may be interviewing for first jobs. I think asking those questions about culture and really trying to understand where things are at before you commit to that company is a really wise decision to make.
I agree with so many things that you just said, and I don't even know where to pick from to to add to. But so work-life harmony sticks out to me because I think that's very important. There's not gonna be like, "Oh, every Friday I'm off." It's like pits and valleys. There's, busy times and lull times, and having that harmony is really key. But when I think about your question, Gabby, I'm really, wanting to emphasize, like, just psychological safety. I think as a Black woman in our field, women in our field, period, we're underrepresented. And being in environments that you feel safe, asking questions, sharing ideas, and even making mistakes is really key in making me feel motivated. And of course, I like to be in environments where there's high standards and I can move with excellence, right? I also really care deeply about purpose. The things that I do really has to align with something that is purposeful to me, right? That means something to me. And when I understand how my work really connects to like a bigger mission, whether it's advancing science, enabling innovation, talking with you guys and empowering people, right? I show up more fully. This is when I feel, invested and I want to do well. And the best cultures I've ever experienced, hands down, are ones where leaders really trust their teams. You have autonomy. They care about our growth. They make it clear that people are valued and it's not just output, but for perspective. And that was really key when I was deciding to leave Northrop and go into Leidos. It wasn't really about the work that I'm doing. Of course, I love the work that I do, but it's who I work for was really important too.
Absolutely. And so you kind of both have touched about things that, are important to you in the culture of the workplace are- that you're in. But how important are things like, diversity? You already touched upon that a little bit, but I want to go a little bit deeper in mental health, right? I mean, we can get pretty crazy about depending on our schedules and things that are going on and customer demands and so on. But I want to know a little bit deeper how important are those things like diversity, mental health, flexibility to your generation, younger people that starting to join the workforce?
Yeah, well, for me, especially since I just made a change in my organization, those were not nice to have. They were not nice to have. They were very important because when I was at Northrop, I felt fully supported too, right? So I knew I was not going to go into a new environment where I didn't feel the same way. So they're not nice to have. They're clear indicators whether an organization is serious about long-term success. It is clear, everyone knows this. Diversity drives better problem solving. Having folks with all different types of backgrounds, all different types of experience really helps you get the best solution to what problem you're trying to solve. And we already know how mental health can really affect the work that we do. So having that support, really ensuring people can sustain high performance without burning out, super important. And flexibility, we just talked about the work life harmony, right? Recognizing that life is just because you walk through the office door doesn't mean life stops. And it's these really are all three things are not soft. They're very strategic. Organizations that prioritize that. One of the biggest things we do with technology is not just how much dollars does it save, but are employees happier? Because if they're happier, then you attract better talent. You retain people longer. They can adapt more quickly to change. So for many of us, choosing where to work is also about choosing an environment, and that's something I love to talk about over and over again because we have to be in places where we feel like we can thrive as whole people.
Oh, I agree so much with everything you said, and I kinda wanna go back to your statement about psychological safety, earlier because, like, for me, that's been a big part of how I choose to pursue, like, options and programs and careers. I think you're absolutely right in that psychological safety is not a nice to have, it is an absolute must have. I think that employees that can bring their full selves to work and work on teams that appreciate everybody's individual superpowers and all the great benefits that come out of diversity, then that's when we really thrive. I think that something that is insanely important to me, especially when I pick roles, is I'm insanely passionate about innovation. And I think all I think a
Mhm.
lot of us are. I think it's part of being an engineer is being curious and thoughtful and really wanting to change the way we think about things and really wanting to do make the world a better place through things that we can design. And I think having those individual experiences and having the personalities and the bringing your full self to work mentality where you have so many people who have so many good thoughts and a culture of speaking out safely is something that maybe has been underappreciated in the past, but I think the millennial generation, I think we have come to really value a lot of that kind of stuff. And as I start hiring into the younger generations, Gen Z, and working with kids in the Gen Alpha area, I think they're starting to really good on them, really think through the importance of psychological safety and being your full self at work. So, it was not something to be fair, it was not something I knew to think about when I started my career path, and I think that as we've as we were growing in the time that we grew in, and went to school and learned these lessons, it maybe wasn't something we did enough talking about, but it's something that I think we should spend a lot more time talking about in the future, and I hope that whatever young engineers are inspired by this conversation, they one of their big takeaways is the importance of having a good work-life harmony and being able to bring your full self to work and having a psychological safety culture where people are comfortable speaking out and comfortable presenting ideas even if they may be more disruptive in the area and in the mentality. I think that makes us all stronger.
Absolutely. I think going back to the skills that you mentioned, communication at the very beginning, if we are not seeing those types of things that we want to be experiencing and be part of, I think communication comes into play there because then you can communicate it to other groups of people or other people that are of similar mindset that want to effect the change or want to improve diversity or improve the psychological safety space that we experience that in the workplace. And when we see things that are not working, be that change agent that will make things better. I really love all the things that you mentioned. What do you think the older generations, right? Because the workforce is anywhere from people that are graduating from college and entering the workforce mid career, and then older generations that are still working and closer to retirement. But what do you think that older generation or managers can better understand about young professionals entering today's workforce?
Oh, it's interesting you asked this question because in 2025, one of my big goals for my department was to hire in a bunch of fresh engineers from college, and we interviewed so many of them. We probably interviewed close to 200 fresh out engineers, and it was really amazing experience to get to see how, especially some of the younger generations are, what they were valuing and what they were asking in their interviews and the kinds of mentalities they went into their interviews with. I think that, when I was interviewing, it felt like maybe there was a gap in appreciation of we've talked a lot about communication. The communication aspect on some of this, and people just kind of say, "Oh yeah, do you have good written and verbal communication?" Okay, cool, checkbox. And I think good. I think the key that like a key to really good communication coming into this, I think some of the older generations maybe weren't quite valuing as much as some of the younger generations, is the passion that goes into those communications. I think the way you talk about something you are insanely passionate about with with other people resonates harder with other people, and the words you use to convey those messages get significantly better when you're insanely passionate and you're so passionate, you just want the people you're talking to, like, understand where you're coming from and why you think what you think. I think some of those have been interesting. I also have noticed that, a lot of the younger engineers these days put less value in how they present themselves than I think we've traditionally seen in some of the older generations, and I think it's been an interesting kind of balance to see, especially kids that have come up through the COVID periods of time where most of the experiences that build their work social life have kinda not happened or been mostly online, and I think it's changed the way some of those kids interact in the real world and in a, like, in-office work setting, and I think we've also even noticed that we had a lot of college graduates who were very interested in a mostly work from office scenario because that was something they feel like they missed out on, and my young employees tend to be very value our group social times, but we've also learned that diversity in culture and how we do things like happy hours has had to change a lot because I've noticed a lot of the younger engineers are not very fond of drinking with their coworkers. And so as we've been thinking through planning social events and planning kind of a team building events, we've put a it's kind of the value of the younger generations to do more activities together and less drinking together has really pushed us to think about more culturally relevant type things to do. So a lot of my team, we're big bubble tea fans. We have bubble tea parties every so often, and I think it's important to realize the culture aspects that may be missing in between some of the older generations and how the older generations build esprit de corps versus how some of the younger generations are building that same esprit de corps.
I really love
Absolutely.
that.
I think Meg touched base on a lot of things. I loved everything you just said. I think one thing I'm
Yeah.
gonna push a button on or maybe emphasize on a little bit is one of the things I hear a lot of older managers say is young professionals are they are afraid of hard work, right?
Interesting.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. I hear that a lot. I don't think necessarily millennials, but definitely the Gen Z and the generations as are kind of coming in. And I don't think we're afraid of hard work, but mainly afraid of doing work without purpose or direction.
Mm, yes.
Even as a child, my parents used to get so annoyed with this, but I was the why I gotta do this, why I gotta do this, because I value clarity. And I think a lot of the younger generation, we really do value clarity, transparency, context. We want to understand the why, not just the what, right?
Yes.
And many young professionals are incredibly motivated when they feel trusted and empowered. So when managers take time to really explain decisions and give ownership early and provide real feedback, it really unlocks a level of engagement and creativity that benefits everyone. One of the things I started doing is, a lot of the strategy is done by the higher level managers, and it trickles down, but not too much, right? I started bringing in the full team and really walking through the strategy with them and helping them understand, like, this is how we fit into the overall picture. This is the why and what we're doing, and I find that to be really motivating for them.
I find
What
that
an
very,
so
very interesting that you said afraid to work kind of is
Hard,
gets confused
not not
to
not
work. Yeah.
hard. Yeah,
Yes, thanks for clarifying that. But afraid to work hard gets confused with not having that or not understanding the purpose, right? So nobody wants to do work for just the sake of doing work, right?
right.
Why? That why is very important, and I'm glad that you highlighted that. But Meg, you wanted to say something.
No, it was actually very much along the same lines where I love your comments. I love your comments about the why and the purpose driven work. I mean, I it's hard to speak about passionately about things you love doing if you're not doing things you're passionate about doing.
Right.
And transparency has been a huge deal that my team has really put an emphasis on these days because the why has become so important. And I mean, the why is maybe should be more important. And I think a lot of
Mhm.
these younger generations, including our generation, have been very thoughtful about doing things that they want to do and being doing living purpose-filled careers full of joy and passion and making positive impacts in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you know why, if you know that why, then you can make an impact.
Mhm.
If you don't know why you're doing whatever it is, why are you working on that spreadsheet, or why are you working whatever it is that you're doing, you can't really go at it fully if you're just like moving numbers around or things around just for the sake of doing the work. So I think you both hit it right on the nail, because the why is so important. Really, as leaders, we need to translate, or not translate, communicate that why, communicate that vision to the teams that we're working with, so that together we can go and achieve that impact that we're after. So now I'm curious, how do you define success early in your career?
I think that's a really good question. Early in my career, and even now, I think I've benefited from having really great mentors. Have really helped me guide me to understanding what success actually look like. Because if it was me defining success early in my career, I will tell you, how much money am I making, right? Having those mentors, being able to talk to them and kind of understand how corporate America work and the career trajectory work, I realized that it was really less about the titles, less about the dollars, which is important. Don't get me wrong, because we all have to live, right?
Yeah.
But it was more of like, am I learning? Am I gaining confidence? I used to get really excited when they started trusting me with bigger problems, right? So success at that stage was really about building transferable skills. And until it's a point, it's still about that with me too. And developing a really strong sense of self awareness, starting to understand where and how my skill sets can really add value in what I'm doing.
This is so interesting because mine is kind of similar, but maybe it's slightly different in some of this. I didn't, because I started in a smaller company where it wasn't, they pretty much, I walked in the door and they were like, okay, I don't know, come up with something to do, make money, make patents. I didn't necessarily have a lot of the same experience on trying to get bigger and bigger problems to solve and stuff. So for me, a lot of my early success was defined for me as doing something that I thought was making a positive impact. We just spent a whole bunch of time talking about the why. The why was so, so important to me, especially in a role where your creativity and the way you put your creativity towards innovation or focus your creativity towards that innovation was where the things like the money and the titles and the things like that came from for me. And so for me, I look it was about the problem solving, which I think is what Dr. Daphne was just saying, and I think it's about the making a positive impact and doing things that I am proud to have done. I think there's if there's I look back on my career and I am insanely proud of a lot of the things I've worked on, and I'm especially really proud of some of the things I've developed in the process,
Mhm.
especially when it's like pushing status quo or pushing something that could make a really good lifestyle or a really good social impact or technical impact or just work life impact for some people, especially working in the ag industry. Things like a big part of my career was I worked on crop dusters, the crop duster aircraft. And crop dusting is one of the most dangerous careers in the United States and around the world. Those pilots put a lot of themselves at risk every time to do those jobs, but they're insanely necessary. Crop dusting is a big part of why the US has such bountiful food in our supermarkets and why we are so prosperous in from an agricultural perspective. So without people who are willing to put themselves on the line to do that, we wouldn't have as much food as we have available, and we would have significantly larger portions of under malnutrition areas. And so for me, making a difference, doing things that I could do to make those guys' lives just a little bit safer or make their job just a little bit easier or turn their yields just a little bit more was a huge deal for me. And for me, those were my benchmarks of success going forward. And then personally, I always liked to I I heard once that you should reevaluate what you do every 3 to 5 years. And every
Yeah.
3 to 5 years, I spend a lot of time sitting down with myself and saying, "Do I dread getting out of bed in the morning? Do I, like, hit the snooze button a whole bunch? Am I, like, procrastinating going into work? Am I, what do I when I go to work and I have to pick between tasks, how do I choose which task I'm picking? Is it which fire is the brightest and the loudest at the time? Or is it like something that I just am kind of gravitating towards? And so for me, the other part of personal growth benchmarks and defining success for me was figuring out what I liked and what I didn't like, and then pursuing opportunities to develop the skills that were really calling to me, but while understanding and maintaining the big picture skills that maybe were less calling to me.
Yeah. So I'm also curious about having defined success and what keeps you feeling successful. What kind of feedback or support keeps you feeling like you're growing, like you continue to grow?
Yeah. Well, for me, vague praise or criticism, it has never moved me forward or have brought much value to me. So I think with feedback, being very specific, timely, and actionable is actually the way that I like to give feedback to my own employees too. Giving clear examples and concrete suggestions on what to do or how to approach something, etc. I also value leaders who look at it as a two-way street too, a two-way relationship. So sometimes support looks like someone challenging me, but while also investing in my development, recommending opportunities, that sponsorship part of it, right? Encouraging stretch assignments and being willing to have those honest conversations. I'm always open to feedback as long as they are timely and actionable, like we were speaking before, and they're not just like super vague and doesn't really give me an action that I can go do afterwards. But that kind of support and feedback is really what builds my confidence and accelerates my own growth.
I very much agree. I thought there's not, terribly a whole lot to like different on there to say different on there. I like it when people tell me if I'm doing something wrong or
Right.
if I'm doing something right. Sometimes I will admit that, my husband laughs at me because if he criticizes how I do a chore at home, then I'll just be like, "Okay, cool, you can do this chore now." But if he tells me that he likes the way I'm doing something at home, then I tend to do it more
More.
and,
Yeah.
be a little bit more thoughtful on it. So I think especially for me personally, I think positive feedback is also something that's really important, in receiving in addition to the how can I do better. And then go back to our big word of the day, the why.
The why,
Yes.
yeah.
I love feedback that tells me why it's there. So, why is this important to your career? And it's something that I've had a lot of really good mentors who have been very good at the transparency aspect and giving feedback and saying, maybe like you're doing a great job doing these things, but it's being perceived by the customer in this other way because you are kind of maybe not doing these things as well. So maybe if you could execute X, Y, and Z tasks or be a little bit more thoughtful about this specific skill, it's going to translate to the customer a little differently because of whatever the reason is. So I think as I've been trying to give feedback to especially my younger employees, I put a lot of thought into making sure that they understand why that feedback is there in the first place and why those skills are important. I had a mentor one time who told me that there are two very important parts of being a successful engineer. There's the doing the technical part and having that understanding of the technical part, but there's also the part where you have to be aware of the game of corporate America going around and understanding the skills and the resources of how to play that game. And part of that playing the game aspect comes into the how your customers perceive you, how your suppliers perceive you, who is willing to follow you into battle in certain scenarios and why. And so for me, making sure that I get feedback that helps round me out, not just on my sharpen my technical skills, but also sharpen my soft skills, sharpen my competitiveness sometimes, sharpen my customer and supplier experiences. Some things like that are also really, really important to me and why they're important or why people are perceiving them that way.
Absolutely. So let's wrap up with a few quick reflections for those preparing to start their career journey. So, first question, one thing you wish you knew before your first job.
Asking for help. I think we think asking for help diminishes our credibility, but it actually really builds our credibility to say, like, hey, I don't really know this. Can you explain it to me? Or, hey, I don't know this, but I'm going to go find out what it is. I wish I knew that earlier on, that I didn't have to have the perfect answer. And then, quite honestly, a lot of people are making it up as they go along. A lot of people don't know the answers. We're really learning on the job too. So I would say that that is something I feel like folks should really try to know very early on in their career.
Building relationships. Think
Mhm.
I
Good one.
I spent a lot of time in college being that kid that was very happy to be on a team of one, and a lot of my early career being a team of one. But I found that there's a lot of value in working together as a team and strengthening each other. And I think that I wish I had known more about cultivating good relationships at work and finding those mentors and finding those coworkers and putting together and working on teams.
Okay, number two is one skill that you feel every young professional should build early on.
I have okay. Somebody told me this. I was doing a STEM outreach thing recently, and somebody gave this answer to the kids, and I think it's the best thing I've ever heard ever. And it is find something you love to do it, go tell somebody about it, and write about it.
Love
If
it.
you go find something that you if you find a skill you love to do and you go practice it, even if it's not in any formal aspect, it's just something you go research or learn on your own, go tell your mom about it because your mom wants to hear. And those skills help you build that passionate communication. And write it down. Write a quick essay about it and give it to your teacher. Write it down so that you're practicing those skills of communicating your passion and the technical aspects of that thing to, somebody more professional in like an education environment. Those help you build things like resumes and colleges. So find something you love to do it, write it down, and tell somebody about it.
Love it.
I have nothing further to add to that because that was exactly what I was gonna say too. That soft skill of communicating is very important to learn early on. I read a study where a lot of technology companies are actually hiring storytellers
Mm,
because our highly technical folks cannot communicate their ideas. They cannot impact and the value
Interesting.
to different audiences. It's one thing for you to go talk to your fellow engineer and they get super stoked about this super technical thing that you've discovered, but how do you say it to your business leaders for them to actually care about that outcome? So, right on, Meg. Communication early on, figure it out. And I say go talk to your mom about it, but also go talk to your little brother or your little cousin about it too. In a different audience and
yeah.
see if you can explain it for both of them to understand.
Love it. Love it. Okay, one last quick round. It's one word to describe your ideal workplace.
Empowering.
Good one.
Diverse.
Another good one. Yep. Diverse and empowering. I love that. I love that. This was such a thoughtful conversation. Thank you, ladies, for being part
Right.
of it and sharing your insights with the Keys to the Future community.
Absolutely. I truly enjoyed myself. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for having us. I really love having really cool conversations with really cool women.
Same.
What I'm hearing is that young professionals aren't just looking for a paycheck, they're looking for purpose, respect, and the chance to grow. And that's a conversation worth having on both sides of the workspace. Thanks for listening to Keys to the Future. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep unlocking your keys to the future.
Thank you to my guests, Dr. Daphne Chery and Meg Lang. Thanks to Roger Co for quality reviews, and thanks to Joe always.